Hi. I know I haven't been on this in a while, and it's because I've been observing a lot of the things that have happened to a lot of people more recently. Um, More recently, it was, or it is, the Tyree Nichols situation, the brutal beating that happened in Memphis. That is the one thing that is happening. The other thing that is really pressing that is happening here in LA County is there is a lot of eviction. And it's hard for me to talk about it, but I do know what eviction feels like um, because my mom went through it when I was younger, when I was a kid. Being you're nervous, you're scared, you're wondering what's going to happen, if you're going to have a place to stay, if you're going to be able to survive. And as a child of a parent who went through addiction, it's hard because you don't know a lot. All you know is that you trust your parent is going to protect you the best way they know how. And it's hard to talk about this because my mom is not here anymore. But I know what people are going through because I was a child with a parent that went through eviction. And it wasn't even her fault. Um, but what I do know, it's very scary. Back when it happened to my mother, I remember, and I'm just really gathering the pieces because it was many, many years ago, more than maybe 2 decades ago. Um, I remember sheriffs coming to the door, and when they knock on the door, they beat on the door. At least that's what I remember. And they only gave her like maybe an hour and a half to get whatever her possessions out of a place where she rented out a condo from some people who basically they did not tell the truth. They rented the condo out to her and they decided they wanted to come back. And I guess there was a problem between these individuals who rented the condo out to her. And so, as far as that, I know, sticking with the eviction process of the effect of it, it was very scary. My mother had put a lot of things in storage. She wasn't able to afford to get all of her things out of the storage unit. Um, a lot of my pictures, a lot of my things from when I was going to school, displaced. We were displaced. We had to live with a relative. It was scary. She was able to finally get back on her feet, but it took a while. What I do remember is crying and watching her trying to rush to gather as many of my clothes, her clothes, and belongings as she could. And we didn't have a lot of time to get a lot of things out, so a lot of those things were locked inside of the residence. So I found here, I guess, there's different things online that talk about eviction. So, what to do if you're facing this? And so it says you could comply with the eviction notice and vacate the premises, and that's pretty much what happened with us. Then there's you can either fix whatever the problem is with the landlord that mentioned, if it's smoking or pets or late rent, etc., whatever the issues are. Somehow, I guess it can be resolved in some kind of mediation clinic or maybe people coming together and trying to resolve the issues without having to go forward with eviction. You could see the landlord if they still want to go through the eviction, because I believe it there's money involved in time and cost and whatnot. Um, and then people will sometimes stay till the very end and then finally leave. Um, I've seen people get evicted, and there are tenants who really they're struggling and they don't have a lot of money and they're living paycheck to paycheck and they're doing the best that they can. And there's people who take advantage. So let's not say that everybody's innocent because everybody isn't always innocent. And so I know there's two sides to the stories. Um, there's people who probably don't follow the guidelines or whatever the rules of their building and they cause problems and maybe they end up having to face eviction. But I think they're giving warnings to people and then they try to see if they can work things out. And then if it can't be worked out, then they proceed further. Then there are situations where people are wrongfully evicted for things that maybe they've been accused of or they haven't done, or maybe like the situation of COVID where people thought we don't have to pay our rent. If we don't pay our rent, maybe they'll bring us money or they'll maybe waive the rent and we can stay in our apartments. And so there's a lot of confusion with that COVID rent, um, pause. And so some people really thought that you just don't pay any rent. And so they got money and they used it for things maybe they should have been paying rent. And then some people paid a little bit on their rent and they might have lost their job or their hours were cut because of all of the different lockdowns that happened during COVID. And so those are some situations are different case by case. There are people who really have uh, a no fault eviction, is what it's called. And there are situations that are different for each individual, each family. And so some people are lied to, and they, there's a lot of rental scams going on here in California. When I was looking for a place, there were these people who claimed they would show you an apartment and they would show you an apartment and they would ask you for all these documents, but you never talk to the landlords, you never talk to the real rental company. They just were getting like application fees and that's how they got paid. And so there's a lot of rental scams that are going on. There's some where they take your first and last deposit on a place and then the place is not even for rent and you never get your money back. So there's a lot of different situations that have been going on here in California that have been like criminal. And I don't think they really talk much about it. And then there's people who just have a hard time getting along. They don't live well with one another around each other and they have to move to a different place because they don't get along for whatever the reason. And there's a lot of support and a lot of lawyers and a lot of um, backing for landlords, but very little for tenants. And so you have to seek out counselors and people who won't charge a lot for legal counsel when you're going through a procedure of eviction. And so it isn't easy and it isn't fun at all. Um, Evictions are not a good thing because they could be on your record and remain there for 10 years. and make it really hard for you to find another place that is decent to live. Um, some people are already impacted by the COVID lockdowns, and they might have lost their job, and it took a while for them to get back on their feet. And they may have a job, they still don't make the money that maybe they used to, or maybe they still haven't found the right employment. So it may take a while for them to get back on their feet. And some people lost their place because they weren't able to pay the rent, and they already faced eviction for those reasons, because of COVID and maybe other things. So, eviction is an action of expelling someone, especially a tenant, from a property expulsion, and the forced eviction of residents. And so that's what it is. And it isn't um, an experience that one would forget, because I remember when I was just a kid, I didn't know all of the details, but I knew we were getting kicked out of the place where we lived. That meant for a child, you have to leave your school, leave your friends. Um, you don't know where you're going to live. You're worried about your parents. I remember crying. I remember my mom asking, um, if she could get up the money to get some food. And we had to call an aunt and live with her for a little while until they could get on their feet. And it was cramped, it was crowded, it was frustrating, it didn't always feel comfortable, and it was very scary because I didn't know if it was going to get worse or better. Um, I think that's why my mother left California and went back to the South, because she felt like the rents were high then. And this was like in the, I would say, the early 90s. Look at what's happening right now. The rents are really high. People are paying like more than their paycheck, almost like more than half. A lot of people have been impacted by this pandemic. There's a lot of other issues going on out there. And then we have all of the other social issues that are pressing. And so I felt like to do this video is important because evictions are still rising. We have Karen Bass, who's trying to help people who are homeless, but that's only like maybe a small section. There's different places that are cities that say they had like money to help people who are going through or facing homelessness. But I think this thing is going to get worse because the rents are really high, food is really high, gas is high, and the climate of the environment has changed and shifted where either you have it or you don't. And I've been saying this in previous videos. And with all the violence that has been breaking out, even more so the shootings, I feel as a result of what has been going on. We still have a lot of homelessness, and we still are going to get more homelessness. Now, mind you, everybody is not living in a tent that is homeless. You have people living in RVs, you have people living out of hotels, you have people doubling up with family members, you have people who probably they bounce around from place to place, and they don't have one stable place that they can call their own. Um, it's These are different forms of homelessness. They may not be in a tent, but they're homeless. And so this is a thing that maybe the news doesn't really talk about because they haven't had maybe many advocates come out. Maybe some have, but the focus is always on people like in Skid Row and that are intense. And But there is a lot of homelessness that is hidden. There's students that are homeless. There are kids that could be homeless, that maybe they ran away. There might be people who are families that are homeless and they live out of motels and hotels, or they bounce around. Um, they live with different relatives. They're not really stable. They may not even enroll their kids in school because of the moving that they do constantly. And so I thought I would mention this because, unbeknownst to what people have seen on the news, and the news can only report so much, I know, homelessness is starting to skyrocket. And that is the thing that people don't realize. It's easy to clap your hands and to say, oh, they're pumping a lot of money out there to try to help the people that are on the streets. But what they don't realize, everybody's not living in a tent that is homeless. The other thing that I noticed is they're making all these short term rentals. That's not a real home for people to stay in long term. And then, even though they're claiming that they're trying to resolve the homelessness issue, people have other issues that might have contributed to the homelessness, that might need attention, or they might need help. They could have substance problems, they could have mental issues, they could have maybe problems with money, just not having enough, not being able to afford the rents that are constantly rising. So there's different things going on, and I just think that this is not a problem that is just only designated to LA County. I've been seeing it in other cities, in other states. There are people that live in mobile homes that have trouble paying their space rent. There are people that live in different areas where they are not really sure if they're going to even be able to afford where they stay, because maybe they're on a fixed income or their situation changes because of their health issues. So I thought I would do this video. I don't know how long it is, but I think we're going to see something. I think eviction is going to skyrocket. So don't let the Yahoo and Hoopla fool you about, we pumped all this money in to try to help homelessness. We're going to do a homelessness count. There are people that are homeless that aren't necessarily on the street. And you can count as much as you want, but you're not going to find everybody, because not everybody is out on the street necessarily per se, as they are maybe living with relatives, or they might be living out of a motel or a hotel, or they might be going from place to place, they might be drifting. So I think something is happening and it isn't good. And I know I was in a store, and sometimes I window shop, and I was in a store and there was a guy and he was saying, when I moved here, my wife and I, we just had to put, you know, to buy a house, it was $30,000. And we just put some money down on it and we were in our home. Now, that $30,000 is not going to buy you a home. That's what you need almost to put down on a home. And he said, I know where this is going, and it isn't good. And he said it is about the money. And this gentleman, he looked like he was probably in his 70s. And he was right. And there's something happening all over the US, and it isn't good. And it is a clear, defined line of people who are the haves and the have nots. If you just don't have it and you can't afford it, and you are not going to even be able to survive what is coming. I know that sounds grim, but I feel that there is this greed that is taking hold, and you have where it has gotten out of control, where people are very callous, cold hearted, insensitive to people who just need basic places to live, where they can have a decent place to live for their family, shelter. It's becoming a luxury to live in an apartment, even. And the rents are out of control. And it just seems like they go up instead of them capping it and saying, okay, this is as high as it's going to get, and we're going to stop this. There's no end to it. And when you do that, you're going to increase homelessness, hands down. And it's not only the apartments, it's the housing too. People who have houses are defaulting on their mortgages and they're going into foreclosure. And so this is not headed in a good direction at all. So I don't know if you know about stay housed, some might do, but recently I was looking, there's a lot of articles. I try to stay up on this. LA County, they extended the eviction moratorium and it approves relief fund for the landlords as well, so that they could get their money, because if they don't get their money, they're also impacted in another way. And so it's saying that LA, 1 week before they were set to expire, the LA County Board of Supervisors on Tuesday extended by 2 months its tenant protections against eviction for those that are impacted by COVID 19, while also approving the establishment of a $45 million relief fund for small landlords who have been unable to collect rent from some tenants. So, supervisors Lindsay Hovath and Hilda Solis originally asked their colleagues to extend the tenant protections through June. The extension met with opposition, of course, on the board, most notably by the board chair, Janice Hahn, who said that she would not support such a long extension. So they wanted to go to June, but she didn't want to do that. So Hahn indicated that she would be supportive of a shorter time frame, leading to about March 31st, compromised. Okay? So Hovath said the extension was essential to assist renters who continue to be impacted by COVID-19 pandemic, with the magnitude of people who still are getting sick because we have new variants out, still out of work and continuing to die from the emergency. So it's essential that we keep folks cared for in stable housing, she said in a statement following the vote. So the extension was met with anger from property owners who addressed the board, many criticizing members for refusing to end the tenant protections, because a lot of those people want people to be evicted. That landlord's claim has led some renters to simply stop paying rent, in some cases for years, without any financial assistance being provided to the owners. So that concern prompted Supervisor Catherine Barger to introduce an amending motion to establish a $45 million relief fund for the small property owners to protect them, so that they can still be able to run their property without losing as much money as they have. So the board had previously instructed Department of Consumer and Business Affairs to design an assistance program for small landlords. The agency initially recommended a $5 million program. The motion from Barger, the supervisor, Holly Mitchell, expands the program to 45 million, providing assistance up to about $30,000 per rental unit. So under the move, property owners who receive the relief funds must agree not to evict tenants for non-payment of rent. So Solis said that she was disappointed the board did not support an extension through to June, but said even the shorter term relief is welcome. And so that's pretty much what I've come up with. It goes on to say that we all recognize COVID-19 pandemic drastically disrupted our families and economy while disproportionately impacting our most vulnerable. And to that end, we must lead with a compassion to prevent people from falling into homelessness. So that's what she said. So that's pretty much this article. What I do know is I don't think it's over. And I don't think it's really going to get any better as long as we have rents that are continuing to be high, food is high, gas is high, and some of the things that are in our social atmosphere that are pressing and that affect most of us in metropolitan cities and abroad in other areas where they've been impacted by similar issues regarding eviction. So I'm gonna let this end here. Some people are going to be angry. Some people have different views of opinion on the issue. Some people would like to have an extension. Others probably wanted the extensions that already have happened to had end earlier. And I'm well aware everybody has their own opinions, but this I don't feel it's going to get any better as long as we have greedy pockets and we have all these issues and all the underlying issues that create situations for this. We're going to see some things that probably, if it isn't resolved, if there isn't some type of reform on rents and how much to charge people based on income, it's not going to get any better.